Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to wait just a couple minutes for any stragglers and as we set up any technical things on our end and stay hydrated. All right, so you may have noticed you can join us today we're on YouTube, we're streaming to Twitter as well, and we're setting up our Facebook stream as well. So you can join us in a couple of different places. So most of us may be working from home, but we are all over the place. Okay. So I will be taking you through some slides today, and we'll be jumping into Equator as well, and giving you a sense of what sourcing LiDAR data there would look like. At the end, I will give out my contact information as well as introduce you to some other people on the team. If you have any questions, any ideas you want to run by us, if you want to let us know the kind of work that you're doing, if you want any help figuring out a workflow with how to do that, we can always help with that. The expertise on our team is wide and varied, so we do have we can help you out with ideas of how to work basically, and how to get the best results both out of Equator and from your geospatial data in general. Right. Just gonna wait another minute or so here. On our intro slide here, you can see some gorgeous LiDAR data, if I do say so myself, in the background there. All right. Okay. So hopefully anybody who's interested is already with us. And if they're not, good riddance. All right. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We are pretty thrilled to have you here. If it does seem like I'm not making eye contact, I do apologize. It is a funny thing to be doing in a room by yourself. um, but we're hoping to share some really exciting stuff with you today about, as I said, geospatial data in general, LiDAR in particular, and helping you figure out your way around a proposal or two, and sort of give you our take on what it takes to make a winning proposal. I actually may not have mentioned this at the very beginning, but my name is Yelena. I'm the customer success manager at Equator, and I have a background in GIS and in environmental planning specifically. And let's get started here. So just a brief agenda. We're going to be, as I said, we're going to be talking about winning the proposal process. A lot of the work in engineering consulting comes from obviously winning proposals, and we're going to talk about making that process both easier and more fruitful. We're going to talk about using LiDAR data in those proposals and for those projects, and again, really kind of brightening up those projects. We'll talk about creating competitive cost estimates using that data, which I think is where sort of what LiDAR data really offers us. It sort of affects that bottom line, and we'll sort of conclude after that and take any Q&A. So first, just a quick introduction to our team. Oh, I think I may have covered up my own face here. Let me just get myself out of the way here. Out of the way of myself. There we go. So just a little bit about us. Our co-founders, Rebecca and Patrick, you can see them here, and me. And so Rebecca comes from the engineering consulting world and has a lot of experience in water resources and sort of leading engineering projects like that. Patrick's got a lot of uh, a lot of experience in the gaming industry. He's passionate about 3D data, about data in general. He's sort of our technical. He's our technical backbone. And as I mentioned, I have experience as a GIS specialist and a couple of engineering consultants, as well as a lot of customer facing roles. So that's a little bit about us. And like I said, feel free to let us know about you. We want to know who's out there. So I'm going to do a bit of a brief overview of what LiDAR even is and then how it can help you. So over the past decade or so, the cost of collecting elevation data has dramatically decreased. And that's true even for as long as I've been working. The ease of procuring this data and the dropping price of it has been, nothing short of astonishing. Um, they come from local, provincial, national governments. They have realized the benefit of collecting the sort of high resolution elevation data at really, really large scales and making it available. So this has led to an explosion in extremely accurate 3D data that's available um, to consultants, to individuals, to anybody sort of working in this space. Currently, 84% of the US is covered by LiDAR, and they are sort of working their way east to west. And the promise or the hope is to cover the whole country by 2023. Anybody joining us from Canada, the news on that front for us is not as great. We have about 10%, a little bit less of Ontario covered, less than 5% of the whole country. Where we do have it, of course, it's very high quality, but again, not a ton of coverage in Canada. So the problem here is with all of this available data, it is difficult to share it easily online. The files are absolutely massive. We're talking terabytes and terabytes in size, and it can be very difficult to work with. I'm sure you know this, which might be why you are joining us today. So this means that for consultants, for engineers, for environmental scientists, for those people who can really benefit from this data, we're not able to access it. And that means that we're missing out on some very valuable insights, savings of time and savings of cost by having this data readily available to us. And so that brings us to what we're doing here. So LiDAR in proposals specifically and using it in these projects in general. So we're going to talk about what it is, how we can use it, creating more competitive proposals with it, and we're sort of using it to understand your site features before you get out there, creating competitive and competent cost estimates. So having a very thorough understanding of what it is you're getting into and being able to price it correctly. We're also going to talk about starting your design work and starting those assessments without any delays. And again, for those of you who are coming from the engineering consulting world, I think you know that oftentimes start can be sort of a stuttering process. And sometimes you're held up by things that also we think you shouldn't be held up by. So to begin with, what is LiDAR? So airborne LiDAR, airborne LiDAR is collected using planes, GPS, and laser scanners. And if this sounds fancy and high tech, it's because it is, and it's very exciting. So it's gathered by planes flying over these sort of very large areas that we'll be discussing today. These projects are publicly funded, so they're carried out by private contractors on behalf of state or provincial governments or federal agencies in some cases. So they'll hire out to private contractors with the tech who will basically create this data and or sort of create this data for that public entity who will then work on making it broadly available. As far as accuracy goes, the accuracy of LiDAR data can vary depending on weather conditions, on vegetation coverage, sort of the quality of the survey that was ordered and paid for. But in the very, very best cases, so you're talking about a completely clear day, not a lot of vegetation getting in the way of these flyovers. So in the very best cases, you could be looking at accuracy down to 5 centimeters or 2 inches if you feel an imperial. So the accuracy, so again, 5 centimeters, 2 inches. This is very, very good accuracy. And again, this is in the best cases, but it's usually somewhere around there. So each of the data sets available has a quality level rating, which is available as part of the metadata. We'll discuss that a little bit later on too. And you can see for yourself how the data was collected and how accurate it is through accessing this metadata. In recent years, governments in Canada and the US have invested very heavily in collecting just massive amounts of LiDAR. Organizations like the USGS, NOAA or NOAA, and Land Information Ontario have been responsible for collecting sort of the broadest range of this data. So these data providers, they're constantly updating their data, and in some cases, you even have access to historical LiDAR. So for example, in any given place, the USGS has available LiDAR for any given area from, say, 2006, 2012, and 2020. And so you can sort of make a comparison of varying elevations, or like sort of varying landforms that are happening in those different years. And again, this could be relevant to you or not. In some cases, maybe geomorphology, stuff like that, it does end up being very, very relevant. And so that brings us to LiDAR with Equator. I'm just gonna make sure my feed is still all right here. Oh, there I am. So as I mentioned, of course, these data sets can be gigantic. So for those of us that are here, I am sure that you have spent a fair amount of time sitting in front of CAD, sitting in front of ArcGIS, sitting in front of QGIS, just sort of waiting for things to load and having them not load. And that I'm sure has been extremely exciting. What we've done with Equator is harness the sort of processing power that is getting better and cheaper all the time to give people access to this LiDAR data with most of the hard work happening on our side, so happening on our servers. We provide access to these raw point cloud files and the ability to download any derivative products, so DEMs, hillshades, contours in a matter of minutes. What we're always trying to let people know is that the LiDAR point cloud is the best place to start. So this is the raw 3D data that is where all of these derivative products are coming from, and being able to access it is sort of what we're most excited about. Whereas what you're doing with it when you're creating these contours, creating these DEMs, these are fantastic tools for communication and for sort of further model building, but the LiDAR itself is what is really exciting. So the other thing is, so as I mentioned metadata earlier, you can always learn about the provenance of your data. So through through Equator. You can do a deeper dive into where it's coming from, go directly to the source of it. We do also provide an open data search, so for any other open geospatial layers. In those cases, you can trace right back to where that original data is, where that original geospatial data is coming from, where it's saved, and download it directly if you'd like. And of course, any of the sort of LiDAR processing that we do, you can download those derivatives as well. And lastly, so you can always, we have additional design and measurement tools that can help you learn more about your site, answer any questions you have about your site, and just sort of give you a richer experience of what it is that's going on at your site. So something as basic as leaving a few labels, drawing a markup, making it a little bit more understandable for yourself, to something a little bit more involved, like creating cross sections directly from that LiDAR and figuring out the topography of your site. And that's sort of what we offer. I do want to cover a case study or two, just to sort of give you an idea of what people are doing with Equator and with LiDAR out in the wild. All right, and so the first one we worked with a geologist in California. So as I mentioned, a lot of our background is in consulting, and we worked pretty closely with users who are part of that process in different ways. So a lot of like discipline specific work, either in geology, ecology, transportation planning, sort of all over the place. In this case, we worked with a geologist working for a consultant in California. They were working on a proposal for erosion control near a water treatment plant. So as they were doing this work, site access for a variety of reasons was a big issue for them. They had an idea of what was out there based on aerial imagery, which was only really a partial idea, but they didn't have access to the site in the weeks leading up to the proposal due date, and so that put them at a bit of a disadvantage because, again, from an aerial, you can't be completely clear on what it is you're going to find once you finally get out there, if you win. So they, being barred from going to the site, being on this sort of tight timeline, trying to figure out what was going on out there and trying to price out a project, because the outcomes are either that you misunderstand the site completely and lose the project, but sort of equally terrifying is if you do price out the project based on partial information and you win, and then by the time you get out there, you have no idea what you're getting into, and likely sort of cost overruns. You're stressing out your staff, and it's sort of, you're going in not even completely blind. You're going partially blind, so you kind of are supposed to know what you're talking about. So what we did with them, so they sourced LiDAR on the California coast through Equator, and they were able to complete a very accurate screening and sort of preliminary assessment of what was going on, and it was pretty bad. So the erosion was so bad that because there were road closures in the area, they were able to do a very thorough preliminary assessment. They focused on the erosion over time in this location. So this was one of those areas that I mentioned. They were able to source LiDAR going back to about 2016. And there's actually accelerating erosion in this area. So the LiDAR from 2016 compared to the LiDAR from the last couple of years, you could see big differences in what was going on. And they, given this thorough understanding of the site, they did end up winning this project. And just as importantly, they gained a ton of client trust in this process. So they were able to do such a thorough job of detailing exactly what would be necessary, and they were able to know exactly what they would need it to do once they gained site access, that the client sort of felt comfortable with them and sort of knew that they could trust that work. And so in doing that, they're able to stand out and sort of differentiate themselves from the competitors with this sort of back pocket knowledge of what's going on out there. And so this is sort of what we want to highlight the most here is just going in with such a thorough knowledge of what you're getting into that you feel confident and that you can start the project off sort of right off the bat. We again, I'm sure, depending on the sort of disciplines that you come from, I'm sure that you have a lot of experience coming from projects where you're held up more than you're working. And at the start of a project, that sometimes happens where you are held up by a lack of data, a lack of access, these permits and approvals that are sort of necessary for things to get going. There's a big holdup in these cases. And in many cases, you're relying on a partial understanding of the site to begin with, and you could be surprised by site features that you didn't plan for or price for. And as I said, this can end up being pretty costly. With access to LiDAR, again, you have a much more thorough understanding of the site and of the constraints that you're going to find on site from your desk. So purely from a desktop study, you can sort of understand what's going on out there before you get out there. All right, my streaming is just giving me a little bit of a color change here. Just want to make sure I'm still online. And so, like I said, yeah, these desktop studies can take you a lot of the way to a full understanding of your site. You can start these preliminary designs right from day one. So without being held up by these bottlenecks, by these planning studies, by coordinating ground surveys, or waiting on any data delivery, either from the client or from agencies. All of it is out there and ready to go. So later on in the presentation, I will point out how you can use a LiDAR point cloud from Equator and take it out to CAD or GIS in mere minutes. So depending on where it is that you're working. We all have these set up workflows. We all have where we're comfortable working and sort of where we really need this data, where the rest of our team is. And we'll sort of show you how to go from raw point cloud to bringing that out to work on it with the team. The caveat here, obviously, nothing replaces a ground survey. Getting out there and sort of doing that surveying work yourself or with a contractor. But for assessments and for preliminary design, this sort of access to 5 centimeter, 2-inch resolution LiDAR survey data can be an absolute game changer because it's like almost as good as going for a walk out there, just like without your without your equipment. We do have reports from our clients who are saving up to $15,000 on ground-based topographic surveys because of the high-res data that they have access to through Equator. And again, this is obviously we're assuming that some of you out there are in engineering and consulting. We've had real estate clients as well who have, based on what they've seen in the data in a place that's very far away from them, they can't easily access. So based on some of the LiDAR data that they're sourcing, they're making, decisions that are tens of thousands of dollars of sort of things to purchase, things not to purchase, like knowing what's out there and the sort of work that they're going to have to do once they get out there. On that note, so actually in the background here, this is an example. So this is the same area here in Texas, going from the point cloud. We've got the next one over. There's the contour sitting on the aerial. We've got the digital elevation model and a hill shade as well. So this was, again, in minutes. You have access to all of these sort of data outputs, which we think is pretty great. And I wanted to share one more case study before we get into Equator itself, so I can show you how some of this would work. Excuse me. Turns out talking to yourself in a room is actually pretty easy. Go figure. So I just wanted to highlight one more case study. This one is a little bit more local to us in Ontario. So this is a water resources consultant in our province. They do work with large areas trying to sort of design infrastructure while keeping track of drainage and water flow. If any of you have done any work in this sort of area, you can already sort of imagine what the issues might be. So sourcing data at this scale, very time consuming. You're often finding piecemeal data from the client. So whether it's coming from different conservation authorities, different agencies, different sort of local governments, you're sourcing all of it and trying to put it together. And of course, the huge file sizes, especially when looking at something like water resources. So the huge file sizes are a big barrier, and they can cause a lot of issues. Excuse me, if you're working in CAD in GIS. So the sheer file sizes here are fairly prohibitive to sort of doing your best work. So in this case, publicly available LiDAR data, as well as a couple of other sort of open data bits and pieces in Ontario, were able to make their work a lot, this particular consultant's work a lot easier. So a site visit to the site obviously is one thing, but in their case, their site can be many square kilometers, which you're not easily walking that, particularly at proposal time, obviously, and at the beginning of a project. So with LiDAR and Equator, they can comfortably afford to review these massive areas for a proposal without wasting a ton of billable time. And I mean, at the end of the day, that is really what we're here to talk about, is those billable hours and working around that constraint. So in this case, once their projects do start, and don't be fooled, they have won them because of quality insights from LiDAR. So they have a sense of the areas where the ground surveys can amend their existing knowledge. So understanding the areas where they need more particular work, or they need more specificity, or there's something that the project kind of hinges on, they can then decide to do more thorough surveying in those areas. But in general, they're not held up by that sort of initial bottleneck of having to source a massive volume of data before sort of getting to the real work. And they can sort of take off running from that sort of first moment. All right. But yeah, so all of that is fairly exciting, we think. I've got, well, yes, thank you. But also, I want to show you Equator itself. I'm just going to shut up my stream here so I can clear all this up. All right, and turn this guy off. All right, I think we're good to go there. Welcome to Equator. So a sort of familiar interface here to anybody who has done obviously any sort of GIS work and has any familiarity with any of those sort of mapping products. So a familiar site sort of with the Earth here and some of our tools surrounding it. So what I'm going to show you, and I'm just going to see if my cursor is available here, but if not, I can just sort of let you know. All right. Just check my settings. I can just sort of talk you through that there. Okay. So in this example, I have a few things already set up here in an existing site. But what I'm going to do is just take you through what it might look like if you say had a project in, let's say, Texas, and you popped into Equator to source data for that area. One of the basics here is we do have a variety of base layers here, with some with labels, some without, and then an OpenStreetMap base map that's a little bit more barren. So I'm just going to use our base map here with the labels. And once I pop in here, I'm going to zoom into Texas. We'll be using Site Builder. So across the top here, we're going to open up Site Builder and show you what that might look like. I'm just going to zoom out and show you the availability. So we sort of talked about the USGS making LiDAR data available cross-country by 2023. This is where we sit right now. So as I mentioned, they're working their way east to west. And hopefully by 2023, this will all be sort of filled out. And for those of us from Canada, I'm just going to show you our little slice up here. So the GTA is well covered and sort of down here south as well. So that's sort of what we're working with. And it would be fantastic to have a little bit more LiDAR data in Canada, but this is sort of where we sit at the moment. So, yeah. If you are in any of these areas, that is great news for you, because some of the stuff is very, very high quality. So in here, I'm going to switch our base map back to our aerial just so I can sort of see where I am. And I'm going to pop into, let's say, outside of San Antonio here, and try and find a interesting area. So obviously, if you are doing this sort of work, you're looking for your project sites. And you're looking for your project sites, and you have constraints, but feel free to use Equator to look at some of these more interesting areas. So I'm going to find, say here, and on this creek here, I'm going to add a site, and let's call it Swallow Creek. And I'm going to add a site here. On the left side, you'll sort of see all of our derivative products. So I talked about how obviously we have a point cloud available for any of those areas covered in gray. If I click through, I can see that the point cloud here is from 2018 with all the sort of associated data in the attribute table. If I hit view now, it will show me. It'll load. It'll take it a second just to load, but it'll load the LiDAR for that full area, just to sort of give me an idea of what it is that I'm looking at here. And that can be a sort of very, very wide area. But for the site limits that we've chosen, the left sidebar will populate with all the derivative products, including the point cloud itself. So I'm going to add the point cloud here, and I'm going to ask it to generate that. And I'm going to pop back to our layers just to turn off this preview and sort of show you how those come in. And so you'll see that was sort of in mere minutes that point cloud loads in here. In the background, there is a video game engine, which means that we do have a lot of really nice control over sort of what we're looking at and where we're at here. And you can sort of see that the LiDAR itself is giving you just sort of a really great sense of the lay of the land. as well as a sort of just good overview of what's sort of going on in here. Now, in the point cloud itself, you'll see that we do have some vegetation cover. If I pop back into Site Builder and start to load up some of those derivative products, so contours, hill shades, that sort of thing, that is working on the ground only LiDAR. So you're not getting the interference from those from that vegetation. So in this case, I'm going to load some contours. I'm going to go with the sort of recommended settings here of smooth contours at an interval of 1 meter, but you can sort of play with that for your projects. I'm going to pop in and get a DEM as well, and I'm going to generate that as well as a hillshade. And you'll sort of see the speed of this happening. I'm going to turn off that point cloud so we can see our contours here. So again, the speed of this happening is pretty fantastic to sort of get that immediate sense of what's going on the ground. You can click through as well for your for the elevation data there. And so you can query them, check the elevation data. You can sort of add, once you're ready to take this data further, you can add labels and that sort of thing there. In the meantime, so I'm going to turn those off and go back to the point cloud, and you can sort of see it load here. I mentioned those, so in the background our DEM and our hillshade are coming in, and in the meantime I'm going to do a cross section on that point cloud to sort of show you what that might look like. So if I'm interested in a cross section of the creek here, I sort of draw it across the creek there, right click to stop, and you'll see my cross section line is right in there in the yellow. And when I hit view cross section, what is happening is that line is sampling the points all along the points of that point cloud all along that section, to sort of give you an idea of the heights back there. I'm going to show you a pre-made one from another site while our other ones load here. Just going to turn off the visibility of that one. So we'll pop over to this site here. So again, for ease of working, you can sort of turn visibility on and off. I'm going to pop into another area here that we pre-loaded. So the cross sections here as well are pulling from that point cloud, which will load in just a second. And so once that loads and we're looking at, in this case, a cross section right here, clicking through to it and viewing it will again show you the full sort of height and some fairly detailed information along that cross section. Again, the longer your cross section is, it does take a few minutes because it is sampling from we'd like to say billions and billions of points. So that'll load in just a second. And again, in the background too, we've got the DEM and the hillshade getting ready as well. And I might be asking for just a little bit too much of it here. There we go. So again, you can sort of see the level of detail that's available here, and this is pretty impressive for not getting up from your desk to be able to access this sort of this level of specificity, as well as sort of like knowing exactly where it's coming from, and that it's from a trusted source like USGS. All right, so that's an example of that. In the meantime, I'm just going to pop back to our creek here. Back to where we drew those site limits, zoom back to that. and I'll sort of show you the variety of our derivative products that have popped in here. So as we saw, I'm going to turn off my cross section here too. So as we saw, obviously the point cloud was the first thing we pulled in, and this is the basis of everything else. So based on this point cloud, you're getting all of those other derivative products. And let's take a look at the contours first. Oh, spoiler alert. So yeah, we obviously saw those contours as well. I'm going to turn those off. And the DEM that we brought in, and you can sort of see, and again, and it's about getting these sort of insights from your data. The being able to look at the DEM sort of gives you a much sort of clearer picture, like a starker picture of what it is that's going on there. Particularly like something, if you're working on something like water modeling or floodplain modeling, the DEM sort of gives you some great information. And we have had a few people using the Hillshade tool as well. So the Hillshade tool is more of a sort of tool for communication, let's say. But again, it is getting used out there, so it gives you an idea of the lay of the land as well. Okay. And so in there, that was sort of like a vegetated area with a bit of a waterway through it. In the case of this preloaded one, let's see, I'll load in the contours. So again, the contours give you an idea of what's going on out there. But as I mentioned, the DEM, once we load that in, again, it's just a really good representation of what's going on out there, based on that LiDAR, and then the Hillshade as well can, again, just sort of give you an idea of what's going on out there. And the point is here that the LiDAR is massive, but we sort of loaded these things in with no problem at all. So this is sort of a basic introduction of what's possible with these once you sort of start with these point clouds, and you can sort of explore them and just start to sort of really get up close and personal with what's going on in them, and create these derivative works. So this is just sort of the beginning of the conversation, and what we wanted to introduce as part of this this webinar, and we'll be obviously doing more of these and sort of introducing more ideas of how to like get in depth with some of this. But in the meantime, if you do have any questions, I'm just going to pop back to my contact info here. But in the meantime, if you do have any questions or any feedback about what you've seen or about how to source some of this and what to do with it, please get in touch. So my email is on screen there. We'll send it out as part of the event link as well, and hopefully you can go out there and do some very cool work with the LiDAR. I'm going to see if I can get any questions that may be coming in live, but if not, all right. But yeah, so as I mentioned, my email is right there on screen. So Jelena@equatorstudios.com. If you do forget how to spell that, we're also available at contact@equatorstudios.com as well. So please be in touch, and hopefully this was helpful. This was helpful to anything that you might be working on, and hopefully it improves some of your projects. thank you so much for joining us today. And hopefully we'll see you in chat. If you are using Equator, there is a chat function in the bottom right, and that'll come directly to us. There are people on the other side of that, so please get in touch through that. We do also have a discount code available, so we're gonna send that out as part of the email follow up from the Eventbrite link. And I will post that here as well. All right. So yeah, so we will send out the discount code. So it'll be for 50% off for a subscription. And we'll include that as part of the follow-up email from Eventbrite. Thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you in Equator.